Alright, so this game is going to be a Plague Death Knight versus a Control Warlock. And spoiler alert, I've already watched this one, but I was too mean in my first take after rewatching it, so I'm going back and I'm going to try to be a little bit gentler in the things that I'm saying. The Mulligan, great. They keep one staff. Their hand getting the Celestial Projectionist isn't great, but it's fine. But yeah, you'll, I think, hopefully see why I was a little bit crazy this game, and it starts with turn 1 not hitting with your weapon. Into maybe aggro like a hunter if they're gonna summon a bunch of 4/1s, maybe you keep this to kill off those minions, but even then, you should be hitting with the weapon. A control deck is going to have things like Restorat Viper, and 2, if you do want to use it to kill a minion, I usually use the first 2 durabilities freely, and then once the weapon has 1 durability left, then I'll look to kill off other minions. Especially now that they've drawn another weapon, they should be very willing to use the durability on this one, because they can just re-equip it. And at this point, they should have 3 plagues in their deck. And this is important because going into their turn 4, it actually massively affects the rest of the game. Like, it unironically is probably one of the biggest turning points in the game, the way they play their turn 4. And the fact that they haven't hit with their weapon. So at this point, they should have 3 plagues in the opponent's deck. And they can do a couple of different things here. They can either play down with the ship into the Stressed Voldir, down with the ship 2 1-drops, or the Voldir 2 1-drops. If they play one of the 2-drops and then 2 1-drops, they will put 3 more plagues into the opponent's deck, which will give 6 overall plagues, right? And the Chained Guardian will be 5 mana going into turn 5, which is huge because turn 4 is usually when Warlock will play a 4 mana 7/7 taunt minion. So you kind of need the Chained Guardian to kill that thing. But since they don't have the Chained Guardian set to 5 mana, and they don't want to hit this 7/7 with their weapon at this point, which now I agree not swinging with the weapon, that would just be way too much damage. Now they have to make the super suboptimal turn 5 play, which I do think is the best given their situation. My argument is they shouldn't have been in this situation in the first place. Okay, so with the first several turns out of the way, because I think they actually start playing a little bit better after this point, then they have a couple more misplays later on in the game, but that's not important. The way I see it, there are 2 main things that hold people back a lot of the times in this game and keep people in plat or diamond when they could climb. The first one is like the last game, right? They will end up killing off the 7/3 here. They'll discover a card with the Ruben Vizier, no problems with the turn 6. The last video where they played Death Knight is they weren't very flexible, or they weren't as flexible as they could have been. They wanted to maximize as many plagues they could get in the opponent's deck. They prioritized playing Helia over all other things, and if you want to see the other comments I have about that, you can watch that video, but the point is, they just weren't flexible with their game plan. This person's main issue is the fact that they're trying to maximize the amount of value they get out of every single card. They want to make sure every swing with the weapon is as good as it can possibly be. But the problem is, the amount of value that you're giving up over the course of several turns, if you compound all of that, it way outvalues the value of hitting with the perfect, hitting the perfect target with the weapon, right? It's like sometimes when you're playing the game, you don't need to use all of your mana. Also, I respect this play. They're playing 2 Morticians to try to find Helia, I would assume. I respect that because Helia is their main win condition in this matchup. But it's like your mana, right? Sometimes the correct play is to not use all of your mana. Maybe you need to play Twisting Nether on turn 9 and it feels bad because you can't use 1 mana. But that's just how it is. But this player is trying to get as much value every single turn as they can. So they're trying to use all of their mana every turn, even if it's not correct for the certain situation. Like I could play Twisting Nether, but instead I'm gonna play like Hellfire and then Life Tap and then like School Teacher or something. I don't know, that's a terrible example, but you get the point. This play uses all of my mana. It is the maximum value, but it causes you to lose a lot of value in the long run because you're gonna take a lot of damage. That was my analogy. I do like the fact that on turn 7, they drew first and got Helia. I think that ordering was fine. And now that I've gone off on my little tangent, just try to stay out of those two camps, right? Be more flexible in your gameplay and don't try to get the maximum value out of every card in every situation, because sometimes max value isn't the correct play, basically. But yeah, honestly, this game at this point is fine for the Death Knight player. Like, yeah, it's turn 9, they're against a control Warlock, so that's not great. But they didn't have Sargeras on turn 9. Since they didn't have Sargeras on turn 9, that means you want to commit to Death Rattles now. So you want to play both of the Voldirs at this point, so that, because Sargeras, when he puts things into the Twisting Nether, Death Rattles don't go off. So since you know they no longer have it in their hand, I would play both of the Distressed Voldirs to try to get, they're about to play one right now, but they don't. Because you want to get as much value out of them as possible. If you wait another like 3 or 4 turns, right? Because, oh, now is just not the perfect time to play them. But in 4 turns, they top deck Sargeras, and then they cancel your Death Rattles. Now you just lost out on a ton of value, instead of putting Plagues in their deck sooner and getting more value. This turn actually physically hurt me. They end up not playing it. They play the School Teacher, then they draw 2 cards, which is actually going to make them overdraw, by the way. And even though it makes the opponent overdraw as well, they could overdraw a Plague, which means they lose nothing. They have a 40 card deck, which means their deck is a lot more diluted, so there's less like important things for them to lose, and all they lose is Hellfire. Meanwhile, you have Patchwork, the Primus, and both Gnome Munchers in your deck, as well as 1 other Plague card, which means you are very likely to burn a card that is very important to your game plan. And once again, it comes down to, I think, them wanting to get as much value out of the Plagues as possible. Because then they lose Patchwork, and that is a huge win condition because now they can't snipe. I think playing the Chain Guardian here is correct. They have to kill the 8/8. But now you have no way of sniping Sargeras, so if the game goes longer, there's not really much else you can do. So with this last mana, again, you should be playing the Distressed Voldir here, but they play Astalor. And again, I get it. They're trying to maximize their value. They're like, Astalor is active on turn 10. I can do 14 damage with it. And I get that. But again, it's not the correct choice. It doesn't get you value. You have 2 Distressed Voldirs in your hand. That's 4 Plagues they could have had in their deck. And they could have had them in their deck 3 turns ago. If they draw a couple of extra Plagues, if they draw like 1 Frost Plague or something, that could completely change the entire outcome of the game because they aren't able to play a certain card, right? And they have 5 Frost Plagues in their deck right now. Just imagine if they had like 1 or 2 more. I just think, I don't know. I'm not gonna go off anymore about it. But yeah, going into the next turn, their hand is phenomenal. They're still in a fantastic situation. They still have the Voldirs, right? They can still put more Plagues in. They have 2 free Chained Guardians, right? They have a fully mana-thirsted Astalor. But instead, they choose to play Sir Finley. A little bit of a spoiler, I guess. And again, they're just... I think this was an analysis paralysis situation where they just had so many things that they could do. They couldn't choose which one was the best. And so they just decided to reset their whole hand. And sure, they ended up getting the Primus out of this, which I think is a fine play. Like, sure, you have the Primus now, and the Primus was one of the bottom cards of your deck. So the fact that you have it now is nice. But having the Primus does not cancel out 2 free Chained Guardians, right? As well as 2 Voldirs that are in your deck that could have put more Plagues in their deck. And the Warlock has their fair share of misplays too. They played the late game very poorly. And I will say, for this player who is trying to get maximum value, I think that they play the late game pretty well, at least comparatively to their early game, because they are trying to get maximum value out of all these cards. So, come late game, they have a few more cards than they probably should, right? Because they held back a little bit, they do have a couple more cards they can play. I would take the weapon here, put more Plagues in their deck. That's a perfect call. So because of that, they are in a slightly better situation late game. My argument is they shouldn't be this far behind in the first place. It's also a little unlucky that they have 15 plagues in their deck and they've drawn, I think, 1 this game. So that's definitely suboptimal, but you can't really control plagues, right? So this next turn, you can do a couple of different things here. You could play the Nerubian Vizier and just see what happens, right? Just to see if you discover something. That's what they should do. Instead, they're not, but I think they realize their mistake, and that's fine. Here they should take Unholy Frenzy, because they can get a lot of value out of it. What they could do with Unholy Frenzy is they can just use it on the 8/6, and that way the 3/2 dies, they resummon it, so they can get a second Death Rattle. It puts a couple more corpses into their deck. If they want to be super greedy, they can play the Chained Guardian, and then Unholy Frenzy, so that way the Chained Guardian gets another copy of itself out there as well, which is a little bit greedy. I don't think that is the correct play because they need extra removal for the weapon, but playing Hero Power, hitting face, playing Unholy Frenzy, the 1/1 resummons, you get to kill this off. Like, they could have gotten so much more value out of it, but it's okay. They keep Unholy Frenzy. They could maybe use it on like the Primus maybe to get another one of him, and maybe that's the direction they're trying to go. But again, they're seeing these like maximum value 10 out of 10 plays, and they're not taking the 9 out of 10 play that for the situation is better. But it's fine. Going into this turn, what do they have? Okay, the Metronome Guide. I forgot about that. And then they play Symphony of Sins. That's just unlucky. There's nothing this player could do about it. They just randomly generated a Symphony of Sins. Like, what the heck are you supposed to do about that? Which also dilutes their deck further, which means it's even less likely they draw Plagues. Just a very unlucky card for them to have generated here. But what happens next is gonna be even more unlucky. They give it +6/+6, and then they give it Stealth with the 1 mana card they played not too long ago. So now they have to deal with this 10/11 Stealth minion that's on the board. And that definitely does suck, I will admit. This is a horrible spot to be in, but I think they play this very well. I think they play the Tomb Trader here. They hit, then they play the Tomb Trader. They're keeping their cool, and I like that, right? I don't think they're freaking out at this point. They still have 23 HP. They're not overreacting and playing the Primus and trying to go for a Hail Mary. They play the Tomb Trader. They don't spend all of their mana because they know they don't have to, and I respect that quite a bit, actually. Then they draw a couple of Plagues here. Very good for a Death Knight player, and this is when it's in crunch time, right? This is when the plays will matter the most, because at any point somebody could win. Then that happens. Okani is quite possibly the worst thing that could have happened for our Death Knight player, but then the Warlock makes 2 fucking massive misplays that basically cancel out all of the misplays the Death Knight has made up until this point, and that is drawing 6 cards. You realize that you have a ton of Plagues in your deck, right? You realize that you have a 10/8 Stealth minion, an 8/12 Okani, and a weapon that's gonna keep summoning you more minions. This Warlock did not need to draw cards here at all. And the fact that they did turns this game from a guaranteed win from the Warlock to a potential win for our Death Knight player. And that's not the only misplay the Warlock did. No. We'll get into this in just a second. But okay, now as the, also by the way, Sir Finley gets rid of the mana cheat on Howling Blast. It's not a big deal, but it not being 1 mana anymore is a bit of a bummer. I do like the fact that they're using their 0 mana spell to bait out Okani. And this is the next big misplay. What on earth? What spell is Death Knight going to play? Plague Death Knight runs 2 spells. They run 2 down with the ships. If they had chosen Minion, not only could it stop a potential Patchwork, although to be fair, it was burned, but like just in general, it could stop the Primus, it can stop Magatha, it can stop Astalor, it can stop a School Teacher or a Chained Guardian. But instead they choose to cancel just a spell, and because of that, they're able to play the Primus, play Runes of Blood, go to 27 HP, and now the Warlock has a ton of Plagues in their deck. So at this point, the Death Knight's getting kind of bailed out by RNG and just bad play from the Warlock, which happens, right? Like sometimes you'll win a game you didn't necessarily deserve to win, but it's about learning from that, right? Like what could I have done better in that game to maybe close it out earlier? What could I have done better to maybe have not been in this position in the first place, down this much HP, right? Because he's about to go down to, I think, roughly 15 plus 5, at least 7, if not more, potentially. So it's definitely a bit of a misplay on both sides. But yeah, don't be as greedy, is all I gotta say. Also, this Yogg is so demoralizing. They get to steal the Primus, that's insane. To be fair though, they are thinning out their own deck, which is very good for our Death Knight player. Very, very good for our Death Knight player, ladies and gentlemen. Extraordinary. Now, the Warlock actually plays this turn very well. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but they have a full hand, which means if he draws a Plague, he won't actually take the damage. Now, at this point, I think it's got to be Tomb Trader. Actually, this turn, they can almost win the game. They can almost win the game. It's close, but they have a full hand. So what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to play Tomb Trader, right? I think. Yeah, they do play Tomb Trader. They do see that. Then you got to play Howling Blast on, I would probably say, the 4-3, and then maybe kill Yogg's Throne with like a hero power afterwards. But this Howling Blast is just so valuable. No, yeah, you have to hit the 4-3. Okay, cool. I forgot what they did at this point in the game, sorry. They play the Rune, which I think is correct. I would probably take the Might here, just because it's good damage and whatnot. Then you play that, you hero power, and you kill Yogg-Saron. You have an 8-1 on the board. And they ended up losing a Plague. That was very, very good for the Warlock. And at this point, the Warlock is in a bit of a pickle. They're at 7 HP. You have a decent amount of damage showing. But they are going to possibly do some pretty nasty stuff. I'm going to skip ahead like 5 seconds because they end up playing Drain Soul. And with the extra spell damage, they heal up quite a bit of extra HP here. Play the Drain Soul. Play the Drain Soul, Warlock. Please. Oh my gosh, just hit the 8-1. Thank you. My goodness. And then they actually ran a card that I didn't expect. And it got pumped up. Like, this is another unlucky thing for a Death Knight player. Not really much they could have done about that play specifically. Like, yeah, sure, they could have done a lot of things better throughout the game. But for a couple of these rolls with, like, them getting Yogg, the fact that they randomly generated the Symphony of Sins, and the fact that they got a lifesteal minion with Rush pumped up. Like, that's just, there's just nothing that you can do about it. But overall, I think that they have to lose the game here, right? They don't have any healing unless they end up drawing a couple of Plague or Blood Plagues, which could happen, right? Who knows? Maybe the Death Knight will get bailed out again. The game still has a little bit of time left, right? But yeah, if they don't end up drawing a Plague, they say well played. To add insult to injury, they destroy the weapon. Then they BM and play Twisting Nether, and then the Warlock wins. But yeah, I apologize if this was also too mean in the way that I said these things. But I'm just trying to be brutally honest and try to help people improve. Because there are a lot of things that I've seen get played wrong throughout these videos. And this one I think had the most so far, so I was a little bit meaner. But I don't know, I think that sometimes that's what people need a little bit, you know? Like, I can't just say, oh, you did this well, and you could work on a couple of these things. Like, no, there are a lot of things that you can work on as a player to get better. Here are all of them listed out. Maybe I went a bit too hard on them, but I think it's important to know, like, if I learn this, I think I would at least be happy about it. I don't know. Hopefully the person who submitted this, Luna, is not too upset by what I've said. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed and learned something.